The night my headlights died, I was somewhere on a back road south of Meade, Kansas, and I had been driving in the wrong direction for 40 minutes without knowing it. That was the autumn of 1935, 6 weeks since I had left what was left of our place in Reno County, and I had developed by then a particular relationship with being lost that I can only describe as comfortable. When you have nothing specific to arrive at, the wrongness of your direction matters less than you might think. I had pulled off Route 66 2 hours earlier at a junction I could not read in the dark. The sign had lost one of its arms to weather, or someone's truck, and was pointing at nothing in particular, and had been following what I believed was a county road running southwest. The headlights gave out on a rise above a shallow creek bed. Not gradually. One moment they were there, and the next they were not. And I was sitting in a dead dark October in Kansas with a truck that had been threatening to quit in one way or another for 6 weeks and had finally found a new method. I sat in the cab for a minute, letting my eyes adjust. The sky was clear, the dust had thinned in the past weeks, which meant the stars were back, which meant I could see the road in outline, if not in detail. About a mile ahead there was a light. A single yellow window in the dark, low and warm. The kind of light that means someone is still there, still up, still operating under the assumption that the evening is worth inhabiting. I had been on enough empty roads in the past 6 weeks to know how rare that was. The counties between Dodge City and the Oklahoma border had shed people the way a dog sheds in summer, steadily, continuously, without the loss of any single hair feeling like much until you noticed the floor. I got out and walked the truck to the shoulder and left it there and went toward the light on foot. The road was called Calvert Road. I know that now from the mailbox I passed at the property line, though I couldn't read it that night. It was one of those mailboxes that has been hit once too many times and sits at a permanent 30-degree lean like a man who has been punched but decided not to fall. The driveway from the road to the farmhouse was perhaps a quarter mile. I walked it in the dark with my collar up against the wind that comes off the Kansas plains in October, as if it has somewhere to be and doesn't care who it passes through to get there. The farmhouse was a 2-story frame structure, unpainted the way Kansas farmhouses get when the family has been too busy surviving to worry about the outside of things. A barn behind it, larger than the house. A windmill to the left, its wheels spinning slow and steady in the night wind. A kitchen garden that had been put to bed for the season, the stakes and wire still in place, the soil turned and waiting. A truck in the yard, older than mine, which was saying something, with a front fender missing and a rope holding the hood down. There was smoke from the chimney. There was the light in the kitchen window. The rest of the county might have been empty, but this particular piece of it was not. I knocked. There was a silence on the other side of the door that had a specific quality to it. Not the silence of an empty house, but the silence of someone deciding. After about 30 seconds, the door opened. I had been knocking on doors for 6 weeks on Route 66. Farmhouses, lunch counters, gas stations, camp managers' offices. I had become fairly good at reading the first 3 seconds of a face that has opened a door to a stranger. The quick arithmetic of threat assessment. The set of jaw that means no before anything has been said. The particular weariness of someone who has been asked for things they no longer have. This was none of those. Nora Aldrin opened her door and looked at me with dark brown eyes that were neither afraid nor unwelcoming, just clear and direct. The eyes of a woman who has made a decision some time ago about who she is and what she will and won't be moved by, and who applies that decision evenly to everything that presents itself. She was holding a lantern at her left side and a small knife, a paring knife, the kitchen kind, in her right hand, which told me she had not been completely unconcerned, just not performing the concern. She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked past me at the empty road in the dark. "Your truck," she said. "Headlights," I said. She looked at me again. The lantern light caught the dark auburn of her hair where it had escaped from behind her ear, and the faint freckles across her nose. The canvas barn coat was buttoned to the throat. Her boots had one lace that was a different color from the other. She was, I understood without being able to articulate it, entirely self-possessed in a way that had nothing to do with circumstance and everything to do with character. "I'm not looking for anything but a place to set until morning," I said. "Barn's fine." "The barn has a gap in the south wall," she said. "It'll be 20 degrees by 4. She stepped back from the doorway. "There's a cot in the back room." I came in. The kitchen was warm from the wood stove, which was burning low but steady. The table had the remains of a single supper on it, a bowl, a spoon, a piece of bread, and a lamp at the center that was the light I had seen from the rise. She had been doing something at the counter when I knocked, something with her hands, and she went back to it after a moment, putting up the last of the season's dried beans in glass jars, her hands moving with the automatic competence of someone who has done this every October of her life. I stood by the door until she said, without turning, "Sit down. There's coffee if you want it." I sat. The coffee was real, not yesterday's grounds, actual coffee, which told me something about her priorities that I filed away and thought about later. She finished the beans and brought 2 cups and sat across the table and looked at me with the direct look. "Where are you headed?" she said. "California," I said. She nodded. Everyone was headed to California. California was where you headed when you didn't have anywhere specific to be headed. It was less a destination than a direction, a way of organizing the remaining forward motion of a life that had lost its original destination. "Will Calder," I said. "Nora Aldrin," she said. "This is my father's land." Present tense. I noticed it but didn't say anything about it. I slept on the cot in the back room under 2 wool blankets that smelled of cedar and old wood smoke, and I woke at 5 to the sound of her already moving in the kitchen. By the time I came out, she had the stove going and oatmeal on, and she had not waited for me and had not made extra, and then had made extra without mentioning it. She set a bowl in front of me and sat with her own, and we ate mostly without talking because it was 5 in the morning, and the occasion didn't require it. I went out after breakfast to look at the truck. The headlight wiring was a corroded connection at the junction box under the hood, the kind of failure that announces itself all at once after weeks of quiet deterioration. I could fix it with a length of new wire and tape, neither of which I had. I went back to the house. She was already in the barn when I found her, working on the gap in the south wall with boards she had pulled from a stack near the door. She was doing it methodically and without particular urgency, the way people work when the work is simply what the morning requires. She had a hammer and a coffee can of nails, and she was fixing a thing that needed fixing. I said I needed wire and electrical tape if she had any. She put down the hammer and went to the back of the barn and came back with both without being asked where they were for or why. She went back to the boards. I went back to the truck. The fix took an hour. When I came back inside to wash my hands at the pump, she was at the kitchen table with the farm ledger open, a large cloth-bound book with columns of figures in a hand I understood was not hers, the handwriting too formal, too even, her father's. She was adding figures in the margins in her own hand, which was more compressed and efficient. I looked at the ledger by accident and then looked away. The numbers visible in the margin were small enough to constitute a specific kind of story. She was operating on very little, less than very little, the kind of less that requires daily decisions about what counts as necessary. I didn't say anything about it. I dried my hands and thanked her for the wire and said I'd be on my way. She looked up from the ledger. Something in her expression, not asking, just present. "There's a section of fence down on the east side," she said, "between this property and the Henley place." A pause. "The Henleys left in June, but the cattle still respect a fence line if there's one there." I understood this was not a request. It was a piece of information being made available. I could do what I wanted with it. "I can look at it," I said. The east fence was down in 3 places. The posts pulled out of the hardpan by the weight of the wire after the soil had dried and shrunk around them. It was a half-day's work with the right tools, which she had in the barn. Post driver, come along, baling wire. I spent the morning on it. She brought water at 10 and stood looking at the first repaired section, with the expression I was beginning to recognize. The assessment of someone who checks work carefully because she has learned that things done wrong cost more than things left undone. "You know fence," she said. "120 acres in Reno County," I said, "before." She didn't ask about the before. She went back to the house. At midday, she brought lunch to the fence line, bread and salt pork and 2 more cups of coffee, and we ate on the tailgate of her truck in the October sun, which was thin and pale but present, and she talked about the cattle. 6 head, down from 22 when her father died. She had sold 16 to make it through the winter of 1934, and the remaining 6 were her working herd and her income and her planning horizon simultaneously. She talked about them the way farmers talk about cattle when the cattle are not sentiment but arithmetic. What they weighed, what they'd bring at market, what she needed them to bring. I listened and did not offer opinions she hadn't asked for. This was not a performance of restraint. I genuinely did not know enough about her specific situation to have useful opinions, and I had spent enough time on Route 66 to know that unsolicited opinions about other people's surviving strategies were the least useful thing a stranger could offer. She asked about Reno County. I told her, the 120 acres, my grandfather's homestead claim of 1893, the borrowed note, the 3 years of dust, the morning the bank sent the man with the paper. She listened the same way I had, which is to say, completely, without filling the silences with the small sounds people make to show they're following along. When I finished, she said, "My father died in February, dust pneumonia. My mother in March." She said it the way you say facts that have moved past the stage of being feelings, that have become simply the shape of things. "Everyone on this road left by June. The Hinleys, the Garfields, the 3 Pruitt families, everyone. But you stayed," I said. She looked at the fence line I had been working. "My grandfather broke this ground in 1901, she said. "My father was born in that house. I grew up in that house. If I leave," she stopped, started differently. "The land doesn't care whether I stay or go, I know that. But I do." I looked at the fence. The 3 sections I had repaired stood straight in the Kansas afternoon. Behind us, the house sat in the pale sun, the windmill turning, the smoke from the chimney going straight up in the still air. "I understand that," I said. She looked at me then, a long, direct look. "I think you might," she said. I finished the fence that afternoon and came in for supper, which she made without asking whether I was staying for it, which was how I found out I was staying for it. We had beans and cornbread and more of the coffee she apparently considered non-negotiable regardless of what else she economized on, and she told me about the winter coming and what she was planning for it, which was specific and practical and not a small thing. She had worked it out to the cord of wood and the pound of flour, the way someone works things out when the margin for error is 0. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Your water pump." She looked at me. "The pressure's low," I said. "I noticed it at the hand pump this morning. There's either a leak in the line or the foot valve's failing. If it's the foot valve, that's a problem before winter." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've been watching it. I can look at it tomorrow," I said. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," I said. She picked up her coffee cup. Didn't say anything else. Which was how I found out I was staying another day. The foot valve was failing. I pulled the pump rod in the morning and found the leather washer cracked through, which was causing the pressure loss and would eventually cause the pump to fail entirely. A serious problem for a woman alone on a farm in a Kansas winter with 6 cattle and no neighbors within 4 miles. I didn't have a replacement washer. She didn't have one either. The nearest hardware was in Meade, 14 miles, and her truck was running but uncertain. We went together. She drove because she knew the road and because her truck, uncertain as it was better on dirt than mine. She sat straight behind the wheel and drove with the economical attention of someone who has learned that roads in this part of Kansas in October are not to be taken for granted. I watched the land going by through the passenger window, The abandoned farmsteads, the fence lines down and half buried in drifted soil, the fields that had been wheat and were now the particular gray-brown of exhausted earth, and thought about what she had said about her grandfather and the ground and what it meant to stay. The hardware man in Mead knew her by name and asked after the cattle with genuine interest and charged her fare, which told me something about the town and about her standing in it. We got the washer and a spool of copper wire she said she'd been needing, and a bag of flour and 2 pounds of coffee that she put on the counter and then stood looking at for a moment before she put them back and got 1 pound. I went back to the counter after she'd moved on and got the 2nd pound and brought it to the truck and put it in the bed without saying anything. She saw me do it from across the street. She didn't say anything either. On the drive back, she asked about my wife. Not whether I had one, she'd already registered the ring, or the absence of it, and had drawn her own conclusions. She asked about whether I had people waiting somewhere. I told her about the farm, which she already knew. I told her about my mother in Wichita, who was with my sister, and was fine. I told her about the 6 weeks on Route 66, and where I had thought I was going, and how I had become progressively less certain about it without noticing the progression. California, she said. That was the idea, I said. She kept her eyes on the road. A lot of people have gone, she said. Not many have come back talking well of it. I know, I said. I've talked to some of them. What did they say? That it's not what you hope it's going to be, I said. That it's work if you can get it and camp if you can't. That the Californians don't want you there. That the men who get there first take the best positions, and the men who come after get less and less. I paused. That the idea of California is better than the fact of it. She drove for a while without speaking. The Kansas plains went by on both sides, flat and wide and mostly empty, and in its own way still beautiful, the way things that have survived something are sometimes more beautiful for what they have survived. Why were you still going then? She said. I thought about it. Because I didn't have a reason not to, I said. She nodded once, slowly, and didn't say anything else for a while, and I watched the road come toward us in the pale October light and thought about the specific arithmetic of reasons, what counts as a reason and what doesn't, and how you know the difference. The pump was fixed by mid-afternoon. It held pressure when I primed it, and the water ran clear and strong the way it should. And I stood at the yard pump and ran it until I was sure, and then went to the house to tell her. She was at the kitchen table with the ledger again. She put down the pencil and went out to check it herself, which I had expected, and she ran it the same way I had and then stood there for a moment with her hand on the pump handle. That would have been a bad thing to lose, she said. It would, I said. She looked at the barn and the windmill and the house and the fence line visible in the middle distance. The afternoon light was going amber and long. The smoke from the chimney went straight up again in the still air. You're leaving tomorrow, she said. It wasn't a question. That was the plan, I said. She looked at me then. The dark brown eyes were direct in the amber light, and she had the expression I had learned to read across the past 3 days. Not asking, not performing, just making herself available to what was actually true, rather than what was convenient to pretend was true. You fixed the fence, she said, and the pump. Seemed necessary, I said. The barn roof has a weak section on the west side, she said. It won't hold the weight of a snow. I looked at the barn roof. The weak section was visible from where we stood, the boards slightly buckled and dark. A Kansas winter with a failed barn roof and 6 cattle and no neighbors was a specific kind of problem. I can look at it tomorrow, I said. She was quiet for a moment. The windmill turned. The cattle moved in the near pasture with the slow economy of animals that are doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing. Will, she said. Nora, I said. You don't have to stay because of the roof, she said. I looked at her for a moment. The amber light was full on her face, and the dark auburn of her hair where it had come loose from behind her ear again, and her strong, capable hands were at her sides, and she was looking at me with the clear eyes of a woman who has spent 6 months deciding what she will and won't pretend. "I know that," I said. She looked at me for another moment. Then she turned and went back to the house. At the door, she stopped without turning back. "Supper's at 6, she said. I was there at 6. I was there at 6 the following morning, too. By the end of the week, the barn roof was repaired, and the south fence section had been restrung, and the hand pump was running steady and strong. And I had not mentioned California in 4 days, which was not a coincidence, but which neither of us had acknowledged directly. On a Friday evening in the 3rd week, I was in the barn when she came in looking for something and found me instead. And she stood in the barn door with the October dusk behind her and said, without preamble, the way she said things that she had been considering for a while, "I've been thinking about what you said, about not having a reason not to go." I set down the tool I was holding. "I've been thinking about whether you have one now," she said. I looked at her in the barn door with the last of the Kansas dusk behind her, and I thought about 120 acres in Reno County that I would never stand on again, and a road going west that I had been following for 6 weeks without arriving at anything. And I thought about a woman who opened a door in the dark to a stranger and offered him the back room cot and did not make it into more or less than it was. And I thought about what it felt like to fix a thing that needed fixing and have someone who understood exactly what it would have cost to leave it unfixed. "I think I might," I said. She stood in the barn doorway for a moment longer. Then she said, "Supper's been ready 10 minutes, and went back to the house. I followed her across the yard in the dark and went inside and hung my jacket on the hook she had cleared for me sometime in the 2nd week without saying anything about it, and sat at the table where my place was set across from hers, and we ate supper by the lamp with the October wind moving around the outside of the house that had stood on Calvert Road since 1901. I did not leave the next morning. I did not leave the morning after that. I have been on Calvert Road now for longer than the 6 weeks I spent driving west, and the reasons that seemed to be pulling me forward have gradually revealed themselves to be considerably lighter than the thing I nearly drove past in the dark. The land is still in trouble. The dust is still out there somewhere, patient as ever. The cattle are 7 now, because one of the 6 had a calf in November that Nora named with the practical, unsentimental name of November, and which I have no opinion about except that 7 is better than 6. We are not prosperous. We are not safe in the way that people mean when they use the word. But the roof held through the first snow, and the pump has not failed, and every morning the light comes on in the kitchen before I am awake, and by the time I come in, the coffee is already poured. I was driving west on Route 66 in the dark, and I took a wrong turn, and my headlights failed outside a farm that looked abandoned and was not. That is what I want to say. That the wrong turn was not wrong. That the dark is sometimes the condition under which you see the thing you were going to drive past. Nora Aldrin stayed on her grandfather's land when everyone else left. I have thought about that decision a great deal in the months since I arrived on it unannounced at 10 o'clock on an October night, with nothing to offer but the ability to fix things that were breaking. She stayed because the land was hers, and she was not the kind of person who leaves. I stayed because it turns out, neither am I.